Hello. We're going to get started again momentarily, so if people can find their seats, that'd be great. Thank you so much. I missed the 5-minute warning. No, I said I missed the 5-minute warning. I wanted to do it at 12:50.
Oh, you wanted to start at 12:55?
Yeah. Yeah. It's fine. I was a little worried that we had too much. I was a little worried we had too much time for the workshop session anyway. So stealing some time from my notes.
Obviously, got to capture those.
Would you like a photo of yourself with the poster?
That's not how I roll.
Are you also gonna just do a hand mic? Okay. We are about to get started. If people could find their seats. Yeah.
Started, if you can all take your seats. All right. So I got to avoid being between you and lunch, but now I have to bring you all back from lunch, sorry to interrupt the awesome networking conversations that were happening. Before we get into our final panel or workshop discussion of the day, I'm going to share, just like Mariana did, going to share a little bit about the Every Life Foundation's newborn screening activities and introduce you a little bit more to how the Every Life Foundation works and give some opportunities for you to engage outside of the bootcamp. Many of you already do, and there's many familiar faces here, but the Every Life Foundation at our core, we're a policy and advocacy organization through and through. We drive policy priorities that focus on diagnostics, newborn screening and diagnostics, fixing the regulatory process, closing the innovation gap for those 95% of rare diseases that still need new and better new treatments, and the 5% that are lucky to have a treatment but need better treatments. And then, of course, most recently, adding to our policy goals is the need to ensure equitable access to those treatments that are out there. So we do our work in sort of policy and advocacy and a little bit differently than some organizations. So I thought it might be useful to help walk you through because I think it helps support how you can think about engaging with the organization. Our policy work is really done through our community congress. Many of you are members. That is our strategic advisory network. It is made up of patient organizations, industry partners, professional societies, regulatory groups, anyone that sort of touches the rare disease ecosphere. And that is done through 4 different working groups. They help us set policy priorities, and those policy priorities are going to cut across rare diseases. They're disease agnostic. And they really have to impact and help solve an issue that's going to, or that is experienced by multiple rare diseases. So what you're not going to see coming out of our Every Life policy work are individual disease-specific issues, by and large. But that doesn't mean that we don't address them, because the other part of our organization, what you might know as RDLA, is really the advocacy platform to help you drive your policy priorities. And so there are opportunities still for you to engage through our RDLA programming to help you amplify your voices in your communities on the priorities that may be disease-specific, that may be not cutting across all rare diseases. And so through RDLA is where you might get help with crafting an action alert. Those of you who work with patient organizations know that getting software to be able to send action alerts out to your community and then have them be able to seamlessly contact members of Congress, really expensive. So what we can do to help is, you send us the content in the alert, and then it gets programmed and you get a link. So it's really looking at what tools and resources might help you serve your own communities. And we always want to hear if there are things we haven't thought about, so please do reach out. And then it's the platforms for advocacy, helping connect people to their members of Congress as well as to state officials. So our most recent events have been about connecting with state officials vis-a-vis state advocacy days. We have our next one in Pennsylvania. Hopefully there might be a couple people here from Pennsylvania. But we want to make sure those events are reflective of the community's priorities, so the asks, the policy asks, are always driven by the RDLA Advisory Committee or members of the rare disease community in those states in particular. So the whole point of showing you this is really to say there's a place for you to engage, whether it's in driving our common priorities through our policy work, or in being able to get the training or support or technology, or just being able to come to DC and have assistance with getting meetings set up vis-a-vis Rare Disease Week. Whatever it might be, we're here for all things policy and advocacy. Getting down to what we're here today for is our newborn screening initiative. Our newborn screening initiative is really focused on these three goals: making sure that we can build upon efforts to modernize the newborn screening system. I'm going to go into each of these a little bit. Making sure that we address that equity issue that was talked about this morning, in one sense anyway, in that making sure states align with the RUSP, and through our state RUSP alignment legislation. And then how can we work on federal policy? How can we make sure we're supportive of the community and efforts to expand the federal RUSP to add new conditions? So let's get down into a little bit of detail. So advancing the federal newborn screening policy. We work, and much of this work is led by Dylan, and we work in three main areas. The first is on federal legislation. Don't know that we've talked a ton about this today, but we know that the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act, which authorized newborn screening programming, which created the ACH-DNC, has been expired since 2019. So we work and help lead coalition efforts to update and advance passage of the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act. Currently, they are working to redraft and have a new piece of legislation ready to go for next Congress, so stay tuned. And our work is not done. Just because it has been expired for so long doesn't mean it's not necessary, and it is necessary to really move policy forward, make sure the system can keep up with the needs that are out there. We also work a lot in newborn screening appropriations and advancing and advocating for appropriations for the CDC's newborn screening activities, much of which you saw yesterday, for HRSA's follow-up services, and for some of the things that Mariana spoke about. And then through report language, we are also able to advance other priorities like the National Academy study that Debbie and Dylan talked about earlier today. So new to this year, our appropriations work is also focused on enhancing the CDC's capabilities to work in data infrastructure and modernize their data and data sharing processes called the Eden Project, which I'm sure the CDC team in the back would love to talk about or answer questions on if you have them. And Carla, yes, pointing to Carla. So the other way we work at the federal level is through our ACH-DNC engagement. And you'll see Dylan, you'll see Annie out there at the committee meetings, providing testimony, talking about what's happening and what the issues are in the newborn screening community. We aren't doing that just as Every Life standing up there. Every time we're up there, every time we're working with the committee, Dylan, Annie, others are out there asking you for input, trying to make sure that we're reflecting your voices in our testimony, that we are making sure to call for needed changes, infuse the patient perspective into those committee conversations. And then next, we're going to talk a little bit about state implementation. So I mentioned the RUSP alignment legislation. For those of you who aren't familiar with what RUSP alignment legislation is, it is one way to set a baseline and implement a timely, predictable process for states to follow after a new condition has been added to the RUSP. So it requires that states consider newborn screening for whenever a condition is added to the RUSP. And would we love to have every bill say states are mandated to add it within a certain amount of time? Sure, we would love that, but in some states that's a non-starter, right? We're living in a world where there are some states that just will not defer automatically to a federal process. So we absolutely, at the very least, if they won't allow us to pass a bill that will require it, we require the consideration to be done within a certain amount of time. Every state has different decision-making processes, whether it's an advisory committee or a department-specific process. We want that process to begin within a certain amount of time after the RUSP has been approved. And then we also want to make sure that we are passing legislation that ensures that department has resources to implement in that timeline. And sometimes that requires different timelines for every state because every state has different processes for implementation, for procuring the supplies and the technology they need. And then lastly, what's not on here, and you see an example of in the corner in Texas, is sometimes RUSP alignment legislation can implement requirements for reporting from the department on the status of implementing different conditions, on the resource needs and the barriers that exist within their newborn screening department, and what would help them get over those barriers. What do they need? And I think we saw an example of this just 2 weeks ago. In 2023, we passed Texas RUSP alignment, and one of the requirements was that we hear from the department and that they produce a report to the state and issue it in public on what the barriers to implementation are. As a result, there were several items in that report that are really informative to what we as advocates can now do to support the department, their ability to be able to catch up to where the RUSP is, and then stay up to date moving forward. So it may sound kind of like a throwaway provision, we want a report, but the report really does matter because it provides recommendations that then can be acted on, and it's a way for the department to communicate what they're facing with the public. So we have just about 50% of babies born are in states that are RUSP aligned. RUSP alignment is a great baseline. The RUSP alignment legislation doesn't prevent states from adding conditions that are not on the RUSP, but it simply ensures that there's a timely, easy, predictable path, and it might help take some of the rocks out of patient groups' backpacks who really have to go state by state and fight after a RUSP nomination. And hopefully now these states, as we start to see this in practice, we'll hold them accountable, of course, but we hope that this will help improve the process and make it easier for patient advocates to work in the states after a RUSP nomination. Just a bit of a preview, one thing that we're looking at now that we have a great bulk of states that are RUSP aligned. How can we help put the best practices together into a roadmap that might help other groups that are interested in doing RUSP alignment work in other states implement in your states, as well as some key practices related to condition-specific advocacy to get your condition added in a particular state as that becomes more and more important for RUSP alignment nominations. So stay tuned on that, just a little bit of a preview. Shaping the future of newborn screening has been a huge focus. We have this publication that I think many of you got outside, which is really about how do we need to move forward in modernizing the newborn screening system. I think it aligns nicely with what will come out of the National Academy study. And then what is happening right now as a result of the publication is what can we take from that and add to the new version of the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act. The same thing will happen with the National Academy's report. And it's really an example of advocacy and policy at work, where we can take that report. I think Debbie mentioned, highlight what from that report is directly actionable in your one-pagers. Well, we have an opportunity to time out these reports with moving policy change in the next Congress. So both of these efforts will be hugely influential to helping set up what the future of newborn screening is. And then just a note about how can we get you tools. So Every Life is focused, especially through our RDLA activities, giving tools to the community. We have our Newborn Screening Action Center, rarescreening.org, that tracks not only what states are RUSP aligned, how many conditions are in each state. You can find some contact information there. You can connect to those other tabs you see on the left here, learn about RUSP legislation, learn about the status of the federal legislation and more. So I encourage you to visit. And if there are questions that you're coming to the site with that aren't being answered by the site, give us that feedback, because that's, as we continually build our tools and resources, we want to be answering the questions that you all have, that policymakers especially are asking you for answers for, that then you're looking and trying to find that evidence or that information. So please do give us that feedback so that we can continue to evolve these resources. And then lastly, just some ways to get involved as we move forward. If you aren't getting a monthly Rare Report email that kind of captures some of the news in rare disease, talks about things like Newborn Screening Awareness Month this year, you can sign up there. What's your story? That's our way for you to share your stories, input. There's some questions that are meant to elicit some information from you that is really commonly asked by policymakers, or will help us identify advocates. We're not going to use your stories without coming back to you and talking and telling you, oh, we would like to share your story in this testimony or in this venue, but it's a really helpful way for us to know what stories are out there in the rare disease community and help us amplify your voices. And then lastly, our Rare Giving program. The application's open right now. This is an RDLA program that gives out grants for rare disease-related policy events, tools. There's a DEI-focused tools and resources program, as well as there's opportunities if you're looking for support to travel to policy-related events and things like advisory committee meetings and otherwise. So really encourage you, those of you who are representing patient organizations, to check out the Rare Giving page before the deadline, and which is October 15th, I believe, but I will verify that before, if you can look that up. And please do apply for those resources. It's our way to give back to the community, and we hope that you will engage with us, share your stories, apply for funding, let us know what questions you're getting that you need answered, and we really look forward to engaging with you in the coming months. With that, I will hand it back to Dylan.
Perfect. So that brings us to our last panel of the day. Nope, not lunch. There we go. So I asked Dr. Matthew Ellenwood, Dr. Patricia Hall, and I saw Dean just ran out. I imagine he'll be. October 25th is a deadline for our giving, I've just been told. But if the panelists can come join us up front, and I will grab another chair because we're a short one. And then you can just slide that around. Thank you. I saw Dean just ran out, so I imagine he'll be running back in momentarily. Look at that timing. Dean, if you want to just meet us up here. So while Dean gets up here, so the purpose of this session today, as I said before, I am notoriously at the foundation terrible at titles. It's one of my, I just can't figure them out. And when talking about this panel, I just kept it simple. At some point, we just stopped trying to think of a creative name and just said, this is what we want the panel to talk about, so let's just keep it what it is. And so we're going to focus the last couple hours of today on this very topic. And so we're going to hold your standard panel here for the next 45 to 50 minutes or so, asking our panelists some questions about their experiences, because they've all been in newborn screening for a very long time in various forms. But then we're going to break out into kind of some breakout groups and have more workshop format. And when we get there, I'll talk a little bit more about that, as I talked about this morning. But by way of introduction for our panelists, I want to ask each of them to not only tell us a little bit about themselves and who they are, but how did they get involved in newborn screening, and to really kind of use that as their way of introduction. And so with that, I'll pass the phone.
Hi, I'm Matthew Ellenwood. I am the Chief Scientific Officer at the National MPS Society, and I have been an active researcher in the MPS disorder since 1998. I'm a comparative medical geneticist, which is a fancy way of saying I work on disease models in veterinary patients. I've been aware of newborn screening since the beginning of development for substrates for the MPS disorders. And used to attend urine metabolic screening rounds at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, so all of the principles of the inborn errors of metabolism were well known to me. However, when I arrived at the society, I knew nothing about the institutional infrastructure of newborn screening. I kept asking Terry what she was talking about when she said rust. Terry is my boss, and I had no idea what oxidizing metal had to do with newborn screening. And then when I heard the ACH-DNC, there were times when I just had to repeat it over and over again so I didn't stumble over it. In any case, my first activity at the Society was rewriting and finalizing the nomination for MPS II, and have been active in the rollout for a screening of both MPS I and MPS II. And every life is a huge support in these efforts. So that's my backstory.
Okay, my name is Trisha Hall, and right now I'm one of the co-directors of the Biochemical Genetics Lab at Mayo Clinic. Prior to that, my involvement in newborn screening started when I still lived in Canada. I was doing a postdoc in a newborn screening lab. Then I went to Mayo Clinic again, did my fellowship in clinical biochemical genetics, and moved to Georgia, where I was one of the directors of the Emory Genetics Laboratory, and worked as a consultant with newborn screening program. Worked a lot with Angela this morning, who spoke this morning, and I was also the co-chair of our newborn screening advisory committee for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. So we saw through most of the recent additions. I was the co-chair of our committee, and then I also was director of the newborn screening laboratory in Georgia for a bit over a year before I moved back to Mayo in 2022. And I've been there ever since. We do some primary screening for states for conditions that they haven't been able to bring in-house, and we also do a lot of second-tier testing. And I'm on the Minnesota Advisory Committee right now as well.
You're busy. Thank you. I'm Dean Sir. I am, first of all, a rare disease dad. 2 of my 3 girls were diagnosed with metachromatic leukodystrophy back in 1995. We got started, my wife and I are co-founders of MLD Foundation, and we got started in '99, legally formed in 2001, supporting families, because like Matthew, it's like, what did we miss? What did we want when we were first diagnosed? What were the needs? It was family support. We quickly realized that there had to be much more. So we still do family support, but behind the scenes mostly, and with some of the families engaged, we're involved in everything from policy to clinical trials and therapy development, interacting with the FDA, as well as newborn screening. My first connection with newborn screening was somewhere around 2012-ish or thereabouts, when the ACH-DNC was, well, actually not when the committee was formed, but I think it was 2 years later when they put out the first RUSP. And I'm an electrical engineer, so this logic and data and stuff made sense to me. I said, I can deal with that. And it's the ACH-DNC for you, Austin. There was a Secretary's Advisory Committee for a couple of years in there. But I got involved in that, and I thought, well, I can help with that, and I wanted to help in any way that I could, and little did I know way back then, kind of that big sucking sound of all the different things you can get involved in, and we'll talk about some of that as we go forward. I launched an initiative in 2015 called the RUSP Roundtable, and this is before EveryLife was really well engaged in newborn screening, and pulling people together to just talk about newborn screening issues, people including committee members, advocates, advocates, some industry folks. Illumina was really new then, genomic sequencing, they were involved, and so on. And so this whole idea of this being an ecosystem and having to deal with a broad part of the ecosystem and building relationships, we heard about that earlier, is something that I'm quite familiar with as well. And I'm happy to help you as I'm helping us. We had a gene therapy approved in March by the FDA, and we did, thank you. But if any of you have tried to ever sit on a one-legged stool, that's not much fun. So having a therapy is awesome, and we're excited about that. We submitted our RUSP nomination, and it was accepted and sent off to evidence review in August, last month. But a two-legged stool is not very sturdy either. So we're working on things like access and reimbursement. How do we get, we have the distinguished honor of being the world's most expensive therapy today. And I'm careful to say not but, and we also have had very, very good ratings from ICER, who is a value assessment organization in the US, and then kind of the equivalent of them over in the UK called NICE, who's not always nice, but it's called NICE, and we had outstanding reviews from them. So even though the therapy, its list price is expensive, and of course those are all negotiated, the value is there. So we'll touch on some of those sorts of things along the way here. Thank you.
Perfect. And again, when we were having our discussions before the panel, we're talking about how to approach it, and again, try not to overthink it. The first question I want to pose to the full group that we talked about was, quite simply, what do you wish you had known sooner? What is something within newborn screening that, sitting here today, having been involved for decades worth of experience to the people to my right, what is something that you wish you had known sooner? And so, Dean, we'll start with you and then come back this way to Matthew.
Sure. So I mentioned starting this, this RUSP Roundtable in 2015. We pulled together an MLD-focused group in 2020, in February of 2020, just before the world shut down, and brought experts together with newborn screening, with actually some were from the advisory committee. They were a little more flexible back then. But also some industry folks and some researchers and some other advocates and so on. We all got together, and one of the things that really didn't sink in until you actually do it yourself, and it's it's our disorder. We're trying to absolutely get from point A to point B, is how complex the system is, how many people are involved, and what their roles are. Because it's easy to draw. It's easy to draw those circles of all the different people in the ecosystem. But to say, well, what does the FDA have to do with newborn screening? I mean, that didn't make sense to me till we started learning more about that. And where do all these dozens and dozens of other organizations and individuals play in? And it's not just their roles and titles, but what are the politics of all of that? And so it became really apparent to me, and we spent a lot of time trying to build relationships. Those of you that watch the advisory committee meetings know that I do a lot of testifying there, a lot of public comment, and that's because I want relationships, I want visibility, and that has worked out marvelously for us. And same thing we talked about with Congress a little bit earlier with Debbie, is building those relationships, just so you know those people, just so they've developed some level of trust or respect. They know you're going to stick around, so they can't ignore you as easy, but also that they can count on you as well. So I think that was probably, for me, as I jumped into it initially, was just understanding the complexity and what Every Life and Baby's First Test and so on is doing here and has been doing the last 6 or 7 years just to help the community come up with that level of knowledge is awesome. So I'm not saying you should do everything that I've done, but you're doing it right now, so it's good.
I think, so I kind of have two, which is what I wish I'd known sooner and what I wish I'd done sooner. And what I wish I'd done sooner is generally started everything earlier than I thought I needed to start, because your timeline is going to be very extended for just about everything that we ended up doing. If we thought we would implement it, end of the year, and then it just keeps sliding because it has to go through your budgets, it has to go through this committee, that committee. Newborn screening is a very complicated system, but it exists inside an entire state government usually, which is also a very complicated system. Then you've got your external relationships with your vendors, with your clinicians, with your follow-up team. And so all of those have their own priorities, and fitting into all of those slots and getting the timing to line up to hit what seemed like a reasonable goal when you set it at the time. doesn't necessarily always work out that way. So generally when I'm thinking about it, I always wish I had started sooner. As to what I wish I'd known is kind of how we needed to work on the importance of communication and having our processes when I was in the Georgia committee be a little bit more transparent, because Angela spoke about our Crab A nomination, which actually started out slightly more contentious than she put on the slides, but did get to a good place. And part of that was on us, because that was at a very transitional period for our committee where we went from basically nobody knowing that we existed, and we had our protocols, but there was only 25 people who ever came to our meetings and attended, so everybody there knew the protocols, so we didn't necessarily worry as much about broadcasting them and publishing them and telling people who came to our meetings what they were. So we ended up with a few kind of awkward meetings where, one where we had tons of, company reps, and we didn't have a conflict of interest policy for anybody who spoke at our meetings. We had nothing like that. And so, we kind of learned from that. And then we also, when we had our Crab A nomination, our process was we would never approve something at our first meeting because we had Georgia-specific questions that our Commissioner of Public Health wanted us to answer before we could, and those were never done. So it was like specialists the kids could go to. Will they go to their pediatrician first? Will they go right to the specialist? Where do they go? Who's paying for it? What's the incidence in Georgia? All of those type of things. So no nomination ever comes in with those kind of nuts and bolts information. So we sent it to a work group, and we thought that was a positive step, but we never really communicated that, hey, we're not just sending this off to a work group to go die. That's just our protocol. But we hadn't really told anybody our protocol outside of the group of people we thought knew. And I think that was kind of a lesson to us that we needed to be a bit more transparent in, we have procedures, then they're not intended to stall things. They're just just intended to get us everything we need to do to get a condition screened for. And we should have done a better job of having that information available, or making it available, and making it just more obvious what needed to be done. Because again, now we're a lot better about that because we kind of had a lot more visibility. But before we had that visibility, we kind of just trucked along and everything was going okay. So, but then we really needed to open up our communication and be a little bit more transparent earlier on.
I think I wish I'd known how much more patient I needed to be. I think both as a researcher and someone engaged as an advocate in public health and who knows families, I feel like a failure every day in some ways, because yesterday was too late and institutional progress is slow. And I think it's important to give yourself a little bit of grace that there are a lot of impediments that you may not be able to influence. Do what you can, and in the meantime, also be supporting the families who need it. As a scientist and as a kind of grant writer, as it were, the Ruffs nomination was one of the most important grants I ever wrote in some respects. There were definite tricks and tools and perspectives that I learned. Some of that I published a commentary on it, and you can find a lot of those details online. I'll send you a copy if you can't get it. Pre-positioning literature in your nomination that may be too small to show up in technical expert panel reviews is one strategy, because they will only be looking at large data sets, and the important sibling studies may not be there. If you don't have sibling studies and you don't have large treatment effects, getting those in there are very influential. I also am mindful that I work in the MPS disorders. We are, as it were, a privileged legacy organization. We had three therapies in the early 2000s, one in the teens, and we had other organizations, the Bob Ivanovsky Foundation, who lobbied to start screening for MPS 1, even though they were an MLD organization, because we had a therapy and they could start screening in Illinois. Getting allies is important. You may be, though, working in a disease where you don't even have an animal model, you don't have the biochemistry figured out, you don't have the substrates. Finding researchers who can partner with you, finding people who are interested in biochemistry, in screening, and they can make progress. MLD is a great example of tremendous progress being made on the screening algorithm. It's a triple tier screen, and you end up basically having no false positives, which is also a huge help when you come to your nomination. So there are a lot of important tricks you can use to get the best nomination possible. And they also now have at the ACHDNC a pre-nomination process to give you quick feedback to know whether your condition is ready, which is, I find it annoying personally because I know our conditions are ready. But if you are new to the field, it's also a great way not to lose too much time and to use your time efficiently. I could go on, but I want to make sure everybody has opportunity to ask questions. You can also get in touch with me on any of the experiences we've had. The MPS Society has the distinction of being the only group that has 2 RUSP-nominated conditions to be accepted, which is about 20% of the total after the grandfathered conditions that were brought in. So we've got a lot of experience, and we are very pleased to share that.
And Dylan, if I could add, Terry Klein, who was going to be on this panel, and I apologize, you may have explained that, she said something really profound that I want to convey on her behalf during one of our prep calls. And this is not what I wish I had known, but something I wish or hope that I want you to know, and she wanted you to know, is that you can do this. You can work through this process, get an assay developed, get through the RUSP process, and get this out at the states. It's a lot of work. And of course, we're not anywhere near the size of the MPS Society on the MLD side. Big organizations, small organizations, mom and pop to multi-million-dollar groups, we can all do this. It's a lot of work. Yeah, you can build on and stand on the shoulders of others, and this community is very, very open and sharing. But if you need just that extra encouragement or don't know where to start, you've done it by showing up here, but please get in touch with some of us. You can make this happen.
To that end, because yes, that was a key part that we talked about, is we wanted people to come away with some hope from this session. Not just here's all the things I need to do now. That is part of it. You'll probably leave here with a checklist. But some hope that it is doable and that checklist is manageable. So to that end, one of the questions we wanted to ask the panel was, can you share your experience of a hurdle that you had to overcome while working on newborn screening? There will be many along the way, but feel free to pick just one. But not only what the hurdle was, but how you got past it, how you're able to move forward and continue moving forward, and to whoever would like to go first.
Yeah, I'm amazed in the Olympics, those runners can hit those hurdles going so fast and keep going, and you have to do that. I think one of the bigger hurdles, there are so many, but one was very early on, and Matthew alluded to this in how our assay was put together. What we've got in front of the committee is not what we started off with back in 2016-ish or so with Professor Gelb at the University of Washington as he's developing the assay. We had some really serious problems with false positives. 1 in 12 people would have had a false positive. That's a no-go. And we love Michael, we work with him, we live in the Northwest with him, but he was stumped. And my wife, who's Taryn here, who's a former pediatric nurse and kind of understands the science a little more than me, says, well, what about if we look at the substrate first, the stuff that builds up because we're not having enough enzyme? And Michael said, and then he started to say, well, maybe. And they worked on that. And again, through creative thinking, and sometimes in this case, I think part of the message is bring the disease experience to these scientists or to anybody else in the process. And you can't tell them they're wrong, but you can certainly give them perspective and help them try and understand that. And they might say, oh, I didn't realize that about this disease. And again, as Matthew said, we now test for the substrate, then for the low enzyme level, and then we do a genetic confirmation as well, which, as we all know, in some cases gives us great answers, in some cases gives us no answers. But the more we do, the better there.
You can tell me I'm wrong. It won't be the first time, and it won't be the last time either, so feel free. For hurdles, I think, there's been a lot. I'll avoid the whole pandemic thing, but I think we had a lot of challenges with implementation and the timeliness of our implementations, simply because of how the different calendars that we would work with had to line up. So we could ask for money at one point of the year, we got our budget at one point of the year, and that was what you had for the next 12 months. But we would have had to have requests in to get in line for our vendors prior to those when we didn't necessarily have our budget. So then it was, we had a lot of flexibility from our vendors who were very understanding with our timelines, but kind of those challenges of, I have 6 pieces that I have to get in the correct order, but I have to wait 8 months for piece number 1. And I think that was really challenging and really frustrating from my perspective, just kind of realizing that, like, I can't even start step 1 until 6 months from now, and there's nothing I can do to change that. So I think that was kind of one of the biggest hurdles. And I did not overcome that. The state of Georgia still works on the same timeline, so I just accepted it.
I think my biggest hurdle was just getting a handle on my own freak out on a day-to-day basis. We got the nomination put in. That was actually pretty easy. I had not done enough homework to know what happened after the nomination. And if I had known better, I would have gone through and read the technical expert reports from previous nominations to know what to expect. We actually had situations come up where, based on the calls we had with the technical expert review panel, we lacked literature and we lacked sibling studies. So we were scrambling to get those written and published before the final report was drafted. Making sure that you have someone on as a representative from the disease community who can respond on clinical data or literature within 6 hours of an inquiry, because that panel moves quickly and they need to have people who respond immediately. And having reasonable expectations about the process, they have a very constrained, evidence-based approach to evaluating the nomination. And if you live with these diseases, you live with the evidence, right? They have to take a different approach. So knowing what that approach is, accepting it and working with them is really important. Yeah.
So another big aspect within newborn screening is that there are a wide variety of stakeholders. And this slide that I always love to borrow from Terry Klein really starts to signify it. And it just highlights, and this is just a select few, there are a lot of different versions of this slide that show how many stakeholders are within newborn screening and how they have to interact with each other and are always interacting with each other. It's never a no communication. It might ebb and flow how much you're interacting with a certain stakeholder, but there's always some sort of communication flow going. And so question I wanted to ask for the panel was, can you discuss how you usually began to build and then strengthen your relationship with some of these stakeholders? And who is an unexpected partner within your newborn screening work? And I would say unexpected in the positive sense. Let's keep this on the positive side. And for whoever would like to take it first.
We were intentional. I didn't count the circles here, but I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different stakeholder bubbles that we started off with at the beginning. So we tried to be smart about that. I think the thing that and we were intentional about relationships and engaging and so on. I think the thing that's surprised me, and you said in the positive way. I don't know if it's a positive way. It's just a bigger hurdle, maybe perhaps than some of the others, is the access and reimbursement side. As we all know, and we can all say this by heart now, it's not just a lab test, right? if you have, and I described the stool, you've got to have the therapy, you've got to have the newborn screening to identify the children early, and then you've got to be able to get those children to those therapies. And getting them there can be a physical thing, it can be a transport thing, but in our case, it's that plus the price of the therapy. And the value is awesome. But guess what? That whole payer system, which is just one circle there, roughly can be divided in two. It's the public payers, predominantly Medicaid, and then all of the many private payers. And Medicaid is different in every state, a little bit of federal influence on that. And of course, the private payers are the same. And that is for us, it's another kind of another dark room that that I had no idea. We've all appealed when somebody said, no, you can't do that for your child or for somebody in your community. But I had no idea how that process works, and honestly, I'm afraid I don't really know exactly how they make some of their decisions now. But you have to be prepared for that, and you need to start early on that as well. So all of these folks here, at some point, I mean, you've got to start early. Don't wait until your RUSP nomination is done. Don't wait until it's approved. By then, you're months and really your years behind. So all these things have to happen in parallel. And I would say part of the solution for that is either through your skills or people that are in your community that have different strengths, or people outside of your community that you can partner with. And it might be part of Every Life, or we've done work with MPS Society. Why not coattail on the big guys? What can we learn from them? What can we partner with to help address these many different areas that you need to deal with?
I think for mine, I'd have to go back to when we had our Krabbe nomination in Georgia, and Angela touched on it and why it actually worked quite well at the beginning of today. It was a very interesting process, and it was probably the first one that had any external visibility for our situation in Georgia, because, like I said, for most cases, we knew what we wanted to add. We were following the RUSP, and our pieces were falling into place. With Krabbe, the family came to our advisory committee with an excellent presentation, probably the best presentation I've ever seen at a newborn screening advisory committee meeting, and I've sat through quite a few of them. Well prepared, good data. They had state support that said, hey, we know this isn't going to be free. Like, we're not showing up and saying, just do it, which plenty of people will do. But they showed up and they said, hey, we will be able to get you funding if you need funding. And then this was the one where we said, okay, we're gonna send it to a work group, and we thought that was a positive thing, and they did not think that was a positive thing at the end of that meeting. And it was a little bit awkward, and I don't blame them, because like I said, we did not do a great job communicating that. But this was also like kind of peak pandemic as we were working through this, so it was all virtual meetings. We never saw everybody again in person, actually ever, because we did the whole thing virtually through the pandemic. And working through that with the grandfather who ultimately did the nomination, and actually he showed up for all our work group meetings. He put in the work, and it was great. It was not a relationship I was expecting would actually turn out positive, because it was quite tense for a little bit. But I think kind of just understanding that we had processes to go through, and we thought we were doing the right thing, even though it didn't necessarily appear as though we were making progress. And I do really appreciate that they stuck with us through that they said that they were willing to show up, and they didn't just go, quite frankly, nuclear and go to the state government and say, fix this, which they probably could have. But we really appreciated that they bought in with us, and it was actually really nice. I emailed them after they got added to the RUSP, and we had a nice chat and caught up on everything. And so I think those are kind of the ones where they don't necessarily start out like, hey, we're best friends forever, but that you can work through things, and there are a lot of people who want to get to the right outcome, and there is a process to do that as well.
Again, I feel a little self-conscious because there's so many benefits that we've had in the MPS community that other rare disease may still have to address. We've had a therapy for over 2 decades, so working with patients to get access, that's old hat for us. We hope to soon get some of the same therapies that MLD has, so those big ticket items, those will be a new access barrier for us. One of the things, though, that our board was very clear about was when we got newborn screening put on the RUSP in 2016 for MPS 1, we knew we were going to have a lot of families, and they were going to have a very different level of difficulty, rather than having been on a diagnostic journey for 6 years, they'll just have this perfect little baby, and how they confront that that child might need a transplant or might need to go on ERT. So we have 2 now full-time social workers, one based in the East Coast, one based in the West Coast, to help address these issues. Because when we get full rollout for MPS 1 and 2, we're probably looking at about 90 kids a year confronting these diagnoses with their families. Another challenge is newborn screening is going to identify more attenuated cases. Figuring out how to make that distinction is a new challenge. Working with follow-up teams. I think you asked us who have been some really exciting connections we've made. I would say all of the APHL people. The Association of Public Health Labs, they're my people. I mean, I remember going to my first meeting, and it dawned on me, because I know none of those labs are flush. If you see an institutional culture full of goodwill, collaboration, and positivity, and their budgets are marginal, you know those people rock. And they're also really good dancers. So if you go to APHL, make sure to go to the last party. They're wonderful people. And also, as an advocate, working with state diagnostic labs and working with follow-up teams, just make the ask. I'm not usually I would rather not go to the party. I'll sit on the stoop and not talk to anybody. But if I have a role and I am required to be sort of a facilitator, I'm a chatty Cathy. And so with that sort of job, I'm just like calling up children's hospitals and say, hey, I'm going to be in your town. Can I give a talk? I've never had anybody say no. And done the same thing with state labs. And they actually really love that level of engagement. And so that kind of process has been an unlooked for and wonderful addition to my life.
Well, thank you guys so much for those fantastic answers. And one of the things we had also talked about, and when we originally were trying to conceive how to get to this question, we had started out with like, okay, let's create a slide of all the different issues you have to work on with the newborn screening. And very quickly realized we did not have the time to make that slide. And so this ended up being more just a question. But at the core of the question was that we know that there's so many parallel track of issues that members of the newborn screening community are working on. But we also know that there are different stages of the newborn screening. And so question again for the panel was, can you discuss some issues you've worked on and how they've changed or not changed pre and post RUSP? And so from the patient advocacy perspective, the work doing to get onto the RUSP, I know Dean, you're in that process right now, and Matthew has a few who are in post-RUSP, and then also for Tricia in terms of conditions that the state may have worked to add that was not yet on the RUSP versus conditions that were on the RUSP and how that changed. And so curious, whoever would like to go first.
I think the biggest difference between when you're trying to do something post-RUSP approval or pre-RUSP approval is the evidence review is a monstrous task, and to do that kind of just with your state committee evenings and weekends is a huge ask to get to that level of evidence review. Most people who are on these committees are involved in newborn screening, and so we generally have a pretty reasonable idea of what might be coming up the pipeline, but not at the level of depth that is performed in an evidence review at the RUSP. And even just assembling all the information in a nomination packet. Like our state nomination packets are not nearly as rigorous as what the RUSP requires. So it's kind of just gathering all of that information. If we're working on something post-RUSP, a lot of that has been done for us. So we can say the papers are all here, the literature is all here, they've summarized it for us, which is great. And then also just attempting to do that pre-RUSP, finding the papers, finding the conference abstracts, digging those out. It's a ton of work to get that all done if it hasn't been done for you. So the biggest advantage of something post-RUSP is, even though it's still a monstrous amount of information to go through to review and to understand, the information is all there versus you having to assemble it and go through it, understand it, and communicate it. So I think the kind of effort level for a pre-RUSP, post-RUSP is just orders of magnitude difference on the information needed to make an informed decision.
So I said this on our pre-call. I said we've got way too much, in my opinion, too much focus on RUSP. And I think that's probably maybe too strong a statement. What we need is more focus on all the things around it. The RUSP is just one of those, another trip or another lap around the track. And we've crossed the finish line, but it's not the end of the race yet. For me, we are at that point where the expert review group is looking at our nomination. We feel comfortable that the data is clean, but that's not because it was in the packet. It's because of a decade plus of work that led up to that. But at the same time, our strategy is, and we've had meetings even this week about this, that we take, RUSP alignment is happening. It's in, covers 50% of the babies, which is awesome. If you don't live in one of those, dozen or so states, then we have work to do. But we need to work with all those RUSP alignment states. We need to work with all the other states and identify what challenges they're still going to have implementing our disorder. Because just because a state is RUSP aligned doesn't mean they've got, in fact, those of you that are in Community Congress, and if you're not, you should be, which we saw on a slide a few minutes ago, there is a report from Texas that comes out of their RUSP alignment legislation, and I'd encourage you all to look at that. It's in 2 or 3 pages, not very long, and it's very, very succinct, and it gives you an idea of the challenge. When it's written down, it's just different than when you hear it, or you think you saw a little social media or whatever on it. But it talks about the challenges that the labs have, and every lab will be challenged with every new screen in some way. Some need more space, most need more dollars, more staff, piece of equipment. They need to know what the referral's going to be. The states, rightfully so, would love and prefer to refer in-state, and that isn't always possible. These are rare diseases, so there's a small number of experts across the country. For us, this is just part of a continuum. So we're already dealing with post-RUSP. And even if the answer is no from the committee, and dare I say this, somebody should slap my face, but if the answer is no, we're going to learn something, right? And we've got good data, and we'll build upon that. And the work that we're doing post-RUSP right now is still going to be valuable. It's building relationships, it's building trust. If I go into a lab, or families go into a lab in whatever state and meet the director, and the director says, we don't have any space. We can't put another file, in a cabinet for MLD. We don't have space in the M's. It's like, okay, well, so let's get to work. We'll go to the next legislative session and we'll pay for some more bricks so we can build a new building or whatever. There's always something that we can do to help. So, be it your disorder or for the lab in general. So for us, it's really, and I would encourage you to think of this more as a continuum. It's awesome to reach those milestones. It's a big celebration for one night, and then you get back to work.
So MPS 1 has been on the RUSP since 2016, and Steve had the numbers exactly right. We're at 85% of the birth population, still 8 years out, and we lack 5 states and some territories. MPS 2, which was added just 2 years ago, we're already a third of the birth population, so much faster. And my expectation is the last domino in the states to fall will be Nevada with the construction of their building in 26. And many states that are coming on will bring on MPS 1 and 2 together because they're similar technologies. We have needed to do some very small strategic work within state programs to find those states where we can help get them started. But generally between RUSP alignment and between network states like Iowa does the testing for the Dakotas and Alaska, I can see a path forward for everything. The one thing that does concern me, Puerto Rico has a larger birth cohort than a third of our states. They're not even testing for SMA yet. And it's not because they don't have the desire to. So we need, as a community, as a country, to figure out this problem. That's one thing that concerns me most when I think about getting to complete screening. The other big challenge for us is making sure we can figure out the genotype, or excuse me, the phenotype, potential future phenotype of patients, because that dictates what therapy they get, and there are therapies that have to come on board very early for the neuropathic disease. We thought that would be a big problem for MPS 1, or excuse me, MPS 2. It's probably not, because if you have a mild phenotype, you probably have an uncle or a grandfather or a great uncle who has it, and you can see what that phenotype will be. But we're going to have continued difficulties with MPS 1, so we're in the midst of standing up a variant a curation expert panel with ClinGen to validate these polymorphisms, to try and move through some of these variants of unknown significance. So we have a publicly accessible database that will assist newborn screening labs to know whether this variant is indeed going to cause disease and maybe what kind of disease. And then the work that is being done at the CDC with Eden is going to be really critical to help support that effort. So that's a huge area of where our science and clinical research is going to need to fall as we get towards full screening across the country.
So I have a few more questions on my sheet, but I want to make sure that I open it up to the group. I know we're going to get to the workshop, but does anybody have any questions? And I see one immediately.
Do we all need to protest and go to Puerto Rico?
You know what Puerto Rico is.
I'm sorry, what was the comment?
Should we protest and all go to Puerto Rico?
Their difficulty is resources, like everywhere, and some of that is infrastructure. I do know for our disorders, I think every treatable MPS disorder, there are patients in Puerto Rico. So the big stakeholders, the big biopharma concerns, they're treating patients there. It's just infrastructure. And it's, we have states like, I don't want to name states. I'm not going to shame anybody. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to shame Puerto Rico. I love that place. There are states in this country that don't have a medical geneticist, right? So not only do we have a lack of pediatricians in this country, general care, specialized care is an issue. So there are a lot of places that are at the margin in that regard, and it's all about resources and getting that in front of state legislators and teaching them how to make things more efficient is important. And some of that can happen as part of RUSP alignment. I'm from Arizona, so I'll toot their horn a little bit. I don't want to shame anybody, but I'll definitely toot their horn. Arizona's RUSP alignment, they took the decision for funding out of the legislature. That is with the Department of Public Health. They put more money in the governor's budget, and it goes through. And that's been brilliant to allow them to have the resources. And they added MPS 2 in 2 years and a month, which was pretty quick.
And I would say, to generalize this above Puerto Rico, there are so many of those issues. And as follow Every Life and RDLA, but when there's a call for support or sign on for letters, or if you can get back to DC in February or do the summer Rare Across America, those things are so impactful. It's not just about your disease. I mean, everybody says, the rising tide floats all boats. I like to describe it, because I think it's harder work than watching the tide rise, is you put a highway in, you take the tops off the mountain, you fill in some valleys, you put a lot of bridges in, you put a lot of asphalt down. And I'm happy to do all that work and let MPS take advantage of it, because they've got screening in place. We don't have that for MLD. But when our time comes, I just want to go out there with a can of spray paint and add another lane for us. And I encourage you all to think about that as well. Every voice doesn't just matter, it's impactful when it comes to policy. And if you've never been, and we're not talking about this here, but if you've never been to the Hill, then you're prime candidate for a scholarship, for some travel from these folks. You need to get back there. You'll be in a room that's 5 times this size or 10 times this size, and it's really powerful in experience personally. More importantly, it's a powerful experience and impact on the legislative offices. So you need to engage, I shouldn't say it that way. We would love to have you engage early, even if you haven't even figured out what causes your disorder. You're just pulling families together, and there's 10 of you or 100 of you. engage and start learning, and you will help yourself 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and meanwhile be helping those of us today. And I promise you, after newborns, when we reach 85%, I'm going to keep helping you too, because there's always going to be something else that needs to be done. And these skills, all the skills that we never thought we'd need to have, we need to keep putting those to good use.
I do want to flag one thing, and then Jamie, I see there's a question in the back, and then there's another question in front as well. Matthew brought up a point in terms of Arizona. I have the luxury of working on that legislation, but more as a consultant more than anything else. They had a fee in the legislation. It was, according to Arizona statute, the newborn screening fee was $22. And if anybody knows newborn screening fees, that is very low and caused them a lot of problems. Getting that fee out of the statute was, ignoring the rest of the legislation, was the best thing we did. So if you're looking at adding conditions in your own state, I would encourage you just to double check that they don't have an actual dollar amount. I do not believe there are any states left that have a dollar amount in statute, but it's always worth a double check. And if you do find it, do let us know, because that constrains these labs so much. Because if, for instance, Arizona started charging on their second test as a way around it, because, for instance, most newborn screening fees are somewhere around $150, so $22 was very limiting. And so I just want to flag that, as we've talked a lot about working with states to add conditions to state panels. If they have their newborn screening fee in law, that can be really difficult. And I know there's a question in the back, so whoever has the mic.
Oh, I'm not going to hold us too long, but my question is for the gentleman up there with the foundation. I would like to start a foundation for my condition. Can I talk with you and get your email?
Of course. I mean,
Okay.
that's back where it starts, right? You network with your community, and then you start becoming more official. Yeah, I would love to do that.
Okay,
I'd be happy
thank
to.
you.
Yeah. And anybody else as well.
Perfect. And then Jamie, today, if you want to put your hand a little higher.
One of you made a really important point. I think that's important for the room to understand too, about the shortage of specialists in the country. So one of the, I work, as many of you do, with your specialists. And one of the concerns is about adopting more conditions is there's this massive shortage of biochemical metabolic geneticists in our countries, in our country. It's a worldwide problem, but we're here in the US. And policy is a really important thing, and that's what we're focusing on here. But as we continue to expand, something we need to also consider is this other shortage. And we're talking about the importance of stories. It's important for newborn screening, but it's also really important in helping getting new geneticists into the field, into these clinics. There are shortages. And clinics have openings. They can't fill them fast enough. Like they'll sit there for 5, 6, 7 years. And so your stories, as you're sharing them, are not just helping accelerate newborn screening, they're also helping fill those positions. And I think it's an important thing to consider, and also look at ways you can help that system so that as we can continue to bring new conditions onto the RUS and not have the naysayers in the background, well, there's not enough doctors to support the system as it is. And so we need to be thinking also a little bit more holistically as a system too, so that way we can continue to give every baby the chance they deserve to succeed. And I think the genetics office is a really important thing. And so there are different organizations working to decrease this shortage, but I will tell you, Liz, who's here with me, they have some boot camps for residents, and they are so eager. They want to interact with families. So if you can do grand rounds with a hospital, if you can get in there and talk to those residents, get in there, do it now, because they haven't defined what they're going to do. And so this is our chance to really make an impact and start filling some of those positions. And, our stories are our stories. They work in so many different areas, but I think it's a really important thing as we expand out newborn screening, just to be aware of. So thank you for commenting.
This is a treasured topic, and you bring up some interesting points. The logical fallacy that we can't have newborn screening because we don't have enough clinicians makes my head explode. It's not like newborn screening is creating a disease where it did not exist. These kids are burdening the medical care system already. Newborn screening will make it more efficient than what we have already. Some concrete things that can happen. Does your state allow genetic counselors to function as medical professionals? Because they get leaned on a lot, and if they can't charge for services, that cuts them out of the program. And I agree, getting people brought in through that human connection is incredibly valuable. That's how I started in this field. Within a year of doing research, I was going to fun runs, I was working in advocacy, I was attending funerals. I started to know the community, and that's what really kept me here. One last thing, we need to think about also, I think, legislative approaches that provide debt forgiveness or service forgiveness of debt in underserved communities for people going into medical genetics and pediatrics. Because economically, they just can't make it with their student debt in a field where they don't have billable procedures. That's a sort of a more institutional level approach. And also, anybody going into research in pediatrics, they can get all of their debt forgiven by the NIH within 5 years if they have a joint clinical and research appointment. That's another approach to get people into the field. Oh, you've got this.
I was just going to add another quick point to that, which is it's one of the reasons why there's a large emphasis now on reducing the false positive screening, because there's no geneticist out there that doesn't want to see a patient. The challenge is when only 1 out of 5 children that they're being referred is actually a patient they need to see, and they're spending a lot of time on false positives. So that's why when people are talking about second-tier tests, third-tier tests, it's because there is no capacity. There is always capacity for the patients, but it's the children who don't need to be going to a specialist that shouldn't be going to a specialist. And so that's why there's a lot of emphasis on the specificity of the testing as well.
And show up, if you kind of keep tabs on some of the conferences and you say, I could never go to a biochemical conference, I could never go to a researcher conference. Taryn and I have been going to one particular conference, the Lysosomal Disease Conference, RDCRN network, for, I don't know, 17 or 18 years. And I got to tell you, at the beginning, the only words that I could remember were MLD, MLD. And they never said MLD for the first 7 or 8 years that we were there. But I started to understand how the science kind of generally worked. And again, networking and meeting people. But you, the families, we had such a great impact there because well, why is a family, we set up a booth there, and the doctors would come by and say, why are you here? There's nothing going on with MLD, number one, but then they said, why are families here? And then you start to tell them their story, and they get engaged. And it's the same thing you kind of alluded to, the intern programs. We're having that same challenge in medical researchers in rare disease. There are folks that have, either grayer or less hair than me, and they're aging out, and we need younger people to come in. So the genetic counselors and in that whole field, which is emerging, but even in the old stalwarts, the researchers, we need fresh new blood, and a lot of that is to just give the experience of letting them know that there's passionate families and they get connected to a story. And we heard this from, I think Mariana said, was it you, Mariana? I can't see where you are. She said that there were, a half dozen or so that have gone through your intern program. Weren't you talking about the intern program? The ambassadors. Yeah, and then those people start to recommit themselves into the rare disease space. It happens. It's awesome. This, as you know, this is a wonderful community. None of us want to be here, but we're here, and we'll love on the researchers and the counselors or the students or the whatever, and get them on the journey with us. So.
Before I started the society, I was a researcher at a state university. NORD sponsors student chapters. If you have college-age kids or nieces or nephews, get them interested in getting a rare disease chapter started at their university. They are great public awareness program opportunities. They're great advocacy opportunities, and you're starting in a young population to educate young people about these disorders that affect 30 million people in this country.
So I want to make one comment, and then we're going to get to the workshop. We often talk about newborn screening as a system. You start to see a lot of head nods because we say it probably too much at this point. I think the point has been made. But the reason I wanted to flag that is because when we're talking about policy and advocacy, going back to my conversation with Debbie, a lot of times people ask me, like, well, if I can't advocate for the newborn screening reauthorization, what can I advocate for? I think this past question was a great example, is because it is a system and because it's not just a test, there's so much of the healthcare system that interacts with newborn screening. And this is just a great example of, there's a bill at the federal level called the Access to Genetic Counselor Services Act. And there are plenty of other bills I'm sure I could cite. And so when thinking about policy and advocacy around newborn screening, it is not just the newborn screening bill. It is areas that impact newborn screening, whether it's specialist or access, also has a huge impact. But with that,
Can I just add one thing? I just build on
One
that.
thing.
I know you're on the clock. We heard, I think Amy, kind of tongue-in-cheek, Amy Gaviglio said, our healthcare system is broken. We had those conversations about the newborn screening system 10 years ago, saying it's broken because we couldn't get screens on. That really hurts me when I hear that said. We need to come alongside those people, be they in the legislature or in public health, and say, how can we make this better? What are you struggling with? How can we do this? And we need to have that positive attitude. Blowing stuff up is not going to get us anywhere. So be very, the words matter.
perfect. And so now we're going to get to our workshop, and I'm going to, there we go. So here are some discussion questions that can help prompt you. Feel free to take it however you would like to go, though. But the general idea with this workshop is, in a standard breakout room, we would all go to our tables, come back. Somebody would either get nominated or just be the last person to not say anything, would give a summary of what was said. That's not what we're looking for today. So we want people to utilize these discussion questions to help guide conversation, but also feel free to use thoughts and questions you've had throughout the day. And the hope is after the next 20 to 25 minutes, while you guys are discussing amongst yourselves, we'll come back as a group and you'll bring, either as a table or as an individual, questions that you want to address as a whole, challenges you've had that you want to talk about, or suggestions about anything we've talked about today. So really, again, will allow us for the last 20 to 25 minutes of today to start to address this as a collective, as a workshop. Okay, here are some challenges that have been discussed, because if your community is dealing with that challenge, I guarantee you other communities are dealing with that challenge. And so do please feel to utilize these discussion questions as your guide, but don't, they're a guardrail, not a chain. So please allow your conversation to kind of take you where it will, and to come back to the group with some thoughts, some questions, as well as some challenges and ways you want to approach newborn screening moving forward. And so with that, I encourage everybody to turn in and talk with their tables. Excuse me, everybody. I'm going to try to gather everyone's attention up at the front. If I could just grab everyone's attention. Dean, you are good to stay where you are. We're going to have all the panelists stay. Just stay in there. So the idea, as I said, is to bring your conversations back to the group, your questions, your thoughts, and we can work as a whole to address them. But as you'll see, between myself, Colin, Hannah, and Jamie, we all have a microphone. And so the one thing I ask is that just raise your hand before we want to say something, just so we can make sure it's caught on the recording, so that we can gather all these thoughts. And so with that, just a general, does anybody want to start? If not, I will happily start calling on tables. But does anybody willingly kind of want to jump in what was discussed, any thoughts they had, any questions they want to pose to the group?
All right. We mostly focused on the first one, the first question, in which was, what info would you need to help improve your hope of succeeding in newborn screening? And the number one thing that we came up with was having kind of a checklist for when you're undergoing the RESP application that's accessible to, everyone. So having, what are the things that you need to have, like those other studies that were mentioned in the panel, things that you might not have thought of originally, like that would be really helpful, or people to contact who may have other information or maybe a technical assistance source. That's all available. And then potentially in addition to that is like, what also should you do post-RESP? What is the kind of necessary actions that you need to take to go to states and to get things done in the states as well. So that was kind of our main focus. I don't know, do you have anything to add? The toolkit. Yeah.
So I want to put this question to the group, because I know there are a few people in here who have put RUSP packages together, or at least have worked on them. What is something that you ended up including in the package or working on the package during the development process that you did not expect to be there? So in terms of what would be the underrated item to include on the checklist? And Matthew or Dean, if nobody else raises their hand, I'm going to come to you guys. Does anybody have any thoughts on that question? Answer in the back. And actually, just to make it easier, if you can just say your name and your organization, that'd be great.
How's that? Oh, God. My name is Katherine Anderson. I'm with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. So we're coming up on a vote next year, and one of the things that we had to kind of backtrack on, and something that was mentioned in one of the panels, is having sibling data. You got a sibling who was diagnosed earlier because their older brother or older sister had a diagnosis, having time matched at age 5, they each look like this. At age 8, they each look like this. Was as much as we pulled all the sibling data we could, and we had a ton of other data supporting the efficacy of many of the medications that were available for Duchenne, it was that time-matched sibling data that they really want. And now we're going back and doing that. So catching that type of data early is my recommendation.
And I would say that, and somebody, I think Matthew mentioned this, but you as advocates read some of the nominations and read some of the correspondences, not some of the nominations that weren't accepted, but read that correspondence and see how the committee has responded. The committee has kind of changed how they do that over time, and there's a little bit of ebb and flow, but there's a lot of learning, and those sorts of comments I think you'll find in a number of the letters that are public. They're on their website, so you can learn from that. I'm not sure from our perspective if there was a knock us on the side of the head surprise in the actual RUSP nomination. The form is deceptively simple. If you've looked at it, it's short. The boxes in the little sample are way short. Do know that those will expand when you answer them. But this is not a 50-page form. This is a 10-page or a 15-page form by the time you're done. So a lot of data that supports it, a lot of resources and references that'll be there as well. But do take a look at it. It's something that a layperson can at least work their way through. I mean, I could work my way through it. I don't know what all of those things mean, but you can find a biochemist. You can find, somebody that understands natural history at a statistical level and those sorts of things that can give you insight into what do those particular references mean.
So the current RUSP nomination process has you submit a pre-nomination. and that's basically a two-pager. So that would be a really simple guidepost to what you need to have fulfilled. And actually, there are a lot of resources on the ACHDNC website. In addition to reading the correspondence, although the previous nomination themselves are not published on the site, the expert panel reviews are, and they're not riveting reading. This is not Ernest Hemingway by any means. So make sure you have plenty of coffee on board. But that will teach you a lot. And go through and look at the history as well. There's a lot of stuff on the websites. In our experience, we ended up bringing up data during the expert review that we had not put into the nomination because it was not necessarily part of the critical literature, but they were the sibling studies. They were some of the early epidemiology, and they didn't get caught by the screening criteria of the expert panel. So getting those in the literature when you submit the nomination, then they have to look at it.
And most of the organizations that have submitted either a nomination was accepted or not accepted would be happy to share with you. They'd be happy to share their experience at a technical level or at a higher level, so just ask.
I also want to share quickly in terms of what Matthew referenced, in terms of the previous nomination packages on the website. As somebody who pretty close to 5 years ago to the day was introduced to newborn screening, those were a great resource for me to learn. To Matthew's point, yes, to maybe have the coffee pot next to you. But it is a good deep dive into what exactly is newborn screening and what the committee is looking at, but the committee is not just a committee. The committee speaks on behalf of state advisory committees, but it's also made up of clinicians and researchers, so you can see how they are approaching newborn screening. And so I think the last one I saw was 180 pages. Don't feel the need to do that all in one sitting. But it is a good way to start to understand, okay, here's not only what they're looking at, but how they're looking at. Here's the data that's coming in, and a great way to kind of really start to dig into newborn screening, what exactly it is. And so unless there's any other thoughts, I open back up to the group in terms of anyone want to share a thought, question, concern, a direct answer to a question about that they discussed before. And again, I am happy to start calling on people because there was a lovely murmur throughout that time, so I know you guys were chatting.
Can I add a question to the questions?
Of course.
Okay, I would like to add a question to the questions. Those are great questions. If you can answer those questions, you've got a good roadmap, but I would add, what is one small step? What is that one first step? That thing I need to do first now. You don't have to have it all figured out to get started. So, we get into these complicated processes and there's a lot of work to be done, but just be thinking, what's that one thing I can do to get started or to move forward?
Can anyone think of one that they've taken recently that has, to Dean's point, it's always nice to mark the larger milestones, but marking the smaller milestones is also important. For some people, being here today is their small milestone, which is great. And is that half a hand from Danae? Then I'm taking it.
Definitely keeping track of any kind of milestone. Anything that you can celebrate it, because it can sometimes feel very overwhelming and like you're not moving anywhere. But I think also networking and finding a mentor when you're in this space is so critical. I have met so many amazing people along the way, and I think just getting started, finding someone, within every life or in another patient group who's been in a similar boat, just connecting with others who can help give you a little bit of guidance. And that usually can at least steer you in a direction to get the ball rolling. But it can be that initial step. I feel like you're initially stun-locked. Like, what do I even do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? But finding someone who can serve as a mentor or, just advice. And as Dean said, I think everyone who's been through this process or is going through this is all willing to talk because we understand how overwhelming it can be. And we all understand the value we can give to each other. So I think finding a mentor or just network, I think really is an important first step, really.
I was at 3 different tables, just spent a few minutes, and my last best friend here, Ashley, she's not quite sure where she's, and I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing because I didn't spend the whole time there, but she's not quite sure where she's going, but she's loving on other people. She's supporting families, and she's hearing stories. And then she just casually asked the question, or said, but we don't have a place where all the work is being done on my disorder. And sorry if I'm paraphrasing. But she's making connections, and that's important. I didn't catch the lady's name in the flowered blouse there, but she's a first-timer. Sorry, calling everybody out. But she's a first-timer, and she's making connections. She's doing exactly what you just said. And way back in the back, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name already, on the right, in the brown, a 3-day new employee at the CDC, doing the same thing from the other side of the table. And it's just awesome to see that happen.
So you can go places, and I will say I was that person that was, but Liz, she was the parent who called while she was in the hospital. And I mean, to get where she was from, and I had a conversation with Mariana a couple months prior about the launch of Expecting Health and what they were trying to do and how we could be involved. And I was already feeling very overwhelmed and in over my head with my own work. And Liz was like, well, I want to get involved. And so, keeping the networking is important because someone might come up with an opportunity for you that you yourself may not recognize. And I think it's really opened doors. I mean, she's helping with panels on APHL and Expecting Health. And there's so many things that happen. So the networking is such a powerful tool. And I mean, this boot camp here it will lead to many other opportunities once you get past that initial breaking the ice. So,
I didn't know how to do it this time. I was also going to talk about relationships, but just emphasizing that as someone very new to newborn screening, even just the word networking can feel really intimidating to parents or to new clinicians trying to enter the space. The idea of, I have to do politics is like so over my head. But making those connections is really just about being sincere and curious and wanting to support each other. And just like you said, all the people who have been in the space for a long time that I've reached out to have been so sincere and so eager to help and just very kind people. And it's just a really easy, just get to know them. And that you can easily make really useful, important connections and find those opportunities just from a chat, meeting someone, just from getting to know them.
Is that okay?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, honestly, somebody asked me, Corey, who already left, asked me this morning, who do you represent here? And I said, I'm just a rare mom. And Alice said, stop saying just. And I got to say, like, when I walked in here yesterday, I was like, well, let's see if I fit in. And now I feel like that's not an issue because I feel like I can be my authentic self and just genuine with everybody, which is fabulous. And I'm thankful to all of you for that. I also wanted to say, back to our questions, that we had a couple of really interesting ideas here. And one thing that we talked quite a lot about was false negatives. And something would like to try to accomplish is how to trace a path back to being able to report those false negatives so that feedback and, metric, sorry, I come from industry, so I talk like that, but that metric can be captured. And so there's a lot more awareness of, the false negatives that happened maybe a year to 5, 10 years ago can go back and be tracked and monitored and hopefully make improvements upon that. And then the other point was making NBS info available at prenatal touch points. We touched on that a couple of times throughout the day. But, every one of us, and like Tara, I think you said you were a nurse, right? Oh, are you a nurse? Okay, somebody said something that made me think they were a nurse. Doesn't matter. Oh, genetic, okay. Oh, this lady that was here, right. Okay, I'm going to stop capitalizing. Point being, Like, we all come from really diverse backgrounds, many of us in healthcare or, healthcare adjacent, and even, the vast majority of us, when we were talking, like, well, when we were pregnant, nobody told us about any of this stuff. And, like, you're, like, marginally aware of newborn screening to the point where, when they take your baby, they're going to, stick their foot and get some blood, but that's all you really know. It's important to create that opportunity for education, right, before the baby comes, and so that we can also be informed advocates for ourselves and our babies at the moment, at the very first moment possible.
Trisha?
As far as false negatives go, if you know of a false negative, you can reach out to your state public health department where the child was born. It might be maternal child health. It's in different departments somewhere, but usually you can Google and find the newborn screening website for the lab because they'll have their testing info. And then if you go up, there'll be either a committee or a branch chief or a division chief, and you can report those. How they handle them is different. In some cases, some states have a list of reportable disorders. Congenital hypothyroidism is on some of those lists. It depends on the state. Whether all newborn screening disorders should be reportable disorders for the purposes of state public health is, I think, a different conversation that would probably get you better false negative tracking. But there are avenues to report them. When we got them, when I was in Georgia, if we still had the sample, we'd pull it, we'd rerun it, we'd look at our data, we'd say, should we have caught this? Is there potentially anything else that's going on with this? Is it too high, too low? And I think the thing to consider is there are some disorders that are just they're normal at birth and you will not detect them. So some forms of CAH. So there's, some things like that there's a physiological false negative. But most labs, if you tell them about a false negative, they're going to try to see if it was avoidable and if they can fix it so that they can make it better next time. So it's just a matter of finding it. They're going to dig through their data. If they still have a card, they're going to retest it. They might send it to another lab to test it. But they're going to try to make it better if they know about it. The challenge is we never know about it unless somebody tells us.
And to that point, actually, Michael, if you can pass it to somebody in CDC, because I'm going to ask a follow-up question about that, because Tricia, it's really great to highlight in terms of the state. And I promise this is not meant to be a gotcha question. This is a genuine question for CDC. For false negatives, is there a way in terms of working with CDC to talk about false negatives? And I promise this is not meant to be a gotcha question. If the answer is no, that's fine. But is there a way to work with CDC on false negatives and how they approach it?
So I was looking for Carla.
So there are a lot of different avenues we're looking into to get more case data for states. It's something that requires a bunch of time to look into to see what would be most appropriate, but it's something we're looking into.
Perfect, thank you.
Sometimes there's APHL sessions about them as well. APHL does tend to look at them as well.
So APHL also looks at them. That's great, thank you. And I promise it's the CDC. I was not trying to put you guys on the spot, but I was genuinely curious. And Joanne, I say that you also have the mic in your hand.
Okay, so I do a podcast. It's Record Action. And I also run into a lot of people who mention milestones. If the baby's not developing at a normal rate, if they're sleeping all the time, these are things that you should watch out for. And so these are things that I hear all the time with pretty much every condition that I've interviewed. So these are things to look for. Also, RareX is really good for tracking data. And if you're not signed up with RareX, you're missing out.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm going to put Natasha and Mariana on the spot a little bit because a point was brought up in terms of prenatal education.
Yeah,
I'll just tee you up however you would like to go. Prenatal education.
it's like we planned this. No. No, I was going to just come back to that and emphasize that, yes, and I think everybody in this room probably agrees with you that prenatal education is a big need. And I mentioned this in what I shared earlier, but we've actually done pretty extensive work to try to pilot different strategies and ways to do that successfully. And the outcome of that was through a work group, we actually developed an implementation guide. And we have been working with some states to try to better implement prenatal education across the state. And as Liz has said and many others, we are starting small and we were doing that intentionally, but we have seen some success. So if that's a passion of mine, I am very passionate about prenatal education. So would love to chat with anybody else that is interested in that. But just to know that at that state level, and within the resources that we have available, I'm happy to share them with you. Even individually, you can use some of that to talk with your providers, to talk with others in your community, to start that conversation, but also know that at the state level, those are conversations that we're trying to have as well. So happy to elaborate with anybody that's interested.
Anyone else have any thoughts, questions, ideas that they want to pose to the group? You're pointing me somewhere. Austin, Hannah, if you can get Austin to your right, Mike.
I didn't mention this, but one of the things that when we were originally told about the home assisted urea method was, I liked that it was said that it couldn't be done. I like the challenge aspect, so you could just maybe say that. They said it was impossible. I think that is something that certain researchers are going to be like, okay, let's see. Because I don't know, I wouldn't say it's ego, but we like challenges. So, like we like to solve problems. So I thought that was like, oh, I'm going to solve this problem and that. So, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Any other final thoughts, questions, ideas that we want to address? We are towards the end of the day, so if the answer is no, that's fine. But anyone else? Seeing, hearing none. Thank you so much for a fantastic newborn screening bootcamp. It has been a pleasure working with the Expecting Health team and getting this set up for, I'm just going to say 6th year, I'm pretty sure it's 6. It's always been a pleasure working with them. This year was no different. Thank you to CDC. Yesterday was really fantastic, and also really great to see you here today as part of the attendees to really be in with the group and work with them. And finally, thank you all for coming. These boot camps would be nothing without you guys. We appreciate you coming here, wanting to connect, wanting to learn, wanting to be part of the newborn screening community. So thank you all, and safe travels home.